Well, welcome and thank you for being here today. Today, we are pleased to be joined by four special guests for what we hope will be the first of a series of public policy discussions that we'll be having over the next few months. So our guests are going to talk about the importance and safety of voting in the coming election. So I want to welcome our panelists, Arizona's Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, Dr. Barbara Norinder, Professor of Political Science at the University of Arizona, Amber Mcreynolds, the President and CEO of the National Vote at Home Institute, and Pima County's own County Recorder, F.N. Rodriguez. I'm Mark Clark. I'm the President and CEO of Pima Council on Aging, and I'm coming to you here today from the Katie Dusenberry Healthy Aging Center. And I just want to say just a brief word. Recorder Rodriguez, I think, knows this. I'm sure others of you probably don't. Katie Dusenberry was a wonderful, I think one of the most revered public officials in Pima County, longtime Republican county supervisor, and longtime PCOA board chair. And so we were so pleased to open this Healthy Aging Center last year in November, and then sadly close it to the public in March. So we're glad to be using it here today. So PCOA is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We have a number of roles in Pima County, a key one of which is protecting and advocating for the rights and needs of older adults in Pima County. This year, we've prioritized ensuring that older adults can vote in safe and effective ways. So let's jump right into our panelists. And first, I want to introduce our Arizona State Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs. Secretary Hobbs has long been involved in the Arizona community, working as a social worker and chief compliance officer at one of the largest domestic violence shelters in the country, and volunteering at her local church, among many other things. Secretary Hobbs served as both the Arizona House of Representatives and Arizona Senate Minority Leader. Like me, she has a master's degree in social work from Arizona State University, and she's been a professional social worker for most of her distinguished career. Secretary Hobbs, welcome, and I'd like to invite you to say a few words of introduction.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to join all of you this afternoon and looking forward to this conversation. For the 2 years that I've been in this office, my administration's been focused on building partnership and collaboration with the county election officials across the state to ensure that we are doing our job in running elections effectively, securely. Eligible Arizonan has the ability to participate. And we've been highly focused on election security, and now with the pandemic, focused on what we need to do to ensure that no voter in Arizona has to choose between their health and safety and their right to vote. So we've been working since the presidential preference election back in March, which was at the onset of the pandemic, through the primary that was held in August, up into November, to make sure that voters can vote safely, that we have as many options as available to them as possible, and that you all know about those options so that you can take advantage of them. And glad to be focused today on voting by mail and how you can do that, and looking very much forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you, Secretary Hobbs. We so appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Our next panelist is Dr. Barbara Norinder, political science professor at the University of Arizona, focusing on American politics. Dr. Norinder has authored several books, including The Imperfect Primary, Oddities, Biases, and Strengths in the U.S. Presidential Nominating Process, and Regional Politics and Presidential Primaries. She is the professor of elections and voting behavior at the U of A. Dr. Norinder holds a PhD from the Ohio State University, and has been on the faculty of the University of Arizona since 1990. Welcome, Dr. Norinder, and let us, what would you like to share with us to start with?
Well, thank you for inviting me. It is the Ohio State University. They tried to trademark the Ohio State University, but they weren't allowed to do that. I just want to talk about voting in general and why it's important. We often think about voting as just producing an outcome of someone wins and someone loses. But voting also sends a message to the elected elites about voter preferences. So the winning party or candidates tend to interpret it as a mandate for their particular set of issues, and perhaps the losing group will focus on what they need to change for the next election. And it may seem like one vote doesn't matter, and if we're thinking about the presidential election, we're thinking of millions and millions of voters. But the election ballot actually contains lots of races. There are Senate races, there are state legislative races, there are county races, there are ballot propositions. So in each of those, it's important to have your say in all of these offices and not just think of it as an election for president or for the Senate.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was very informative. And again, we appreciate you being with us as well. Our next guest is Amber Mcreynolds. She's the Chief Executive Officer of the National Vote at Home Institute. She's one of the country's leading experts on election administration and policy and co-author of the book, When Women Vote. In addition to her career with the National Vote at Home Institute, Ms. Mcreynolds served as the Director of Elections for the city of Denver, Colorado, where she transformed the election division into a nationally and internationally award-winning office. She's proven that designing pro-voter policies, voter-centric processes, and implementing technical innovations will improve representation for all voters. Ms. Mcreynolds, welcome, and what would you like to share with our listeners today?
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to see Secretary Hobbs. I haven't seen you since I was down there last time we could travel. So it's great to be here with all of you. And what I would just open by saying is that Arizona certainly was far and above, beyond a lot of other states that have struggled this year with trying to adjust their voting models very quickly with the result of the pandemic. And so because Arizona has had and been on the forefront of more expansion of voting at home options with the permanent early voting list, that certainly put Arizona in a really good position in 2020 versus and comparatively to other states. Vote at home and voting at home has expanded greatly over the last few years and certainly has gained a lot of attention this year in the pandemic. Prior to this year, it was not a political reform conversation. We had red states that were passing legislation on this, including Utah and Nebraska and North Dakota and Florida. But the issue itself has been highly politicized this year, which I think has been very hurtful to all the good reforms that have happened in this space. So it's great to be here today to talk about voting safely this year in 2020.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. Finally, today, we have with us Pima County's County Recorder, F.N. Rodriguez. Recorder Rodriguez is a Tucson native and a graduate of the Sal Point Catholic High School. Winning her first seat as Pima County Recorder in 1993, Recorder Rodriguez has been elected to 7 consecutive terms and has seen Pima County through many shifts, from an antiquated paper ballot system to a computer-based system in the 1990s and to a vote by mail system in 2008. Not running again for office, this will be her last election as recorder, so we assume. Through her dedicated work, Recorder Rodriguez has been instrumental in Pima County's voting system for decades. Recorder Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining us. And please share with us your opening remarks. And by the way, when I said that, we assume that just in case who knows what may happen this year. Anyway,
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you for allowing me to join this prestigious panel members. This is my 28th year in office. This is my 7th presidential election that I have conducted, and I have conducted over 270 elections here in Pima County. So I have seen the process of the changes that the state of Arizona has implemented through the years. I am the proud author and implemented the permanent early voting list, because that was what we were getting requests from our constituents. Why do they have to keep calling for that? So I worked with the political parties and legislators who are no longer at the Capitol anymore to move this process through with our checks and balances, how we clean up the rolls. I'm also very proud that I was the one that instituted the process and the legislation that introduced so our military overseas voters could electronically vote by mail. I have watched the process from the very beginning when I was elected in 1992, where the law changed in 91, where the state of Arizona didn't need an excuse. We used to call it absentee balloting at the time, and watched it progress where over 80% of the citizens here in the state actually vote by mail. This is not new to the state of Arizona. We've had time to perfect our procedures with collaboration, primarily with the Maricopa County and Pima County, because we are the largest populations, and helping our 13 smaller counties. So what we hear on the national news that are impacting other states, I feel for them, because this is a major shift in gears of how they're doing it. But rest assured, the state of Arizona is in a good position. We have experienced recorders. We have some new recorders that we've tutelaged along the way so they can be adequately prepared for this election. Not just because of the volume, because of COVID, the rules and the policies that we've had to change to protect our staff, to protect the voters. We've given the voters 3 options of voting. They can vote by mail, they can vote at an early voting site, or they can go to their polling location on election day. Here in Pima County, we are offering drop-off early balloting, where they just drive up like you're getting Starbucks coffee, but you're just dropping your ballot into the ballot box. So we've had some innovative ideas that we can assure the citizens of the state of Arizona that we know what we're doing, and the citizens need to be prepared for the length of this ballot, because there are so many questions, not just President of the United States, which is an important office, but Senate, Congress, your local cities and towns, school boards, we have Pima College, and there's a lot of initiatives on the ballot.
Well, thank you so much. We have a great and informative group of experts today. And so I just want to remind those of you who are watching, we are taking live written questions from you. So please go ahead and type your question in the chat, either on Facebook or on Vimeo at any time, and we'll do our best to answer them. And I think the first question is actually one that's not in front of me, but let's just talk a couple of key dates here. Voter registration deadline is October 5th. Is that one?
That is correct. It's October 5th. October
5th. And people can register to vote in a number of ways, a number of places. I know the recorder's office here in Pima County has a voter hotline. I think I've got the number 724-4330. Is that the number folks should call here?
That is the main recorder's office number, and you'll get a live person, and you don't have to push buttons either.
Okay, well, that's
correct. I hate pushing buttons to get to it.
That is my favorite thing. And then Secretary Hobbs, I know you've got a new to me, I just heard about it today, a new website of Arizona.vote. Is that correct?
Yes, and voters can get everything they need to vote safely in this election, no matter what county they're in, at Arizona.vote.
So that's for everybody in the whole state, which we're assuming a few people from outside of Pima County may be looking at this. And so Arizona.vote, and then the recorder's office as well. So the 5th of October is the registration deadline, and early ballots then go out
October 7th, that's a Wednesday. And
on
that's
the 7th.
also, and that's across the state. And that's when the recorder's offices can legally mail the first ballots out, and we can open up our early voting sites. Military overseas ballots have already been sent out electronically. Pima County has electronically sent out 4,000 of them already, and we've already received 500 back.
Okay. Well, we'll try to come back around to those phone numbers and website addresses later on. We have one question so far, and that actually is addressed to you, Secretary Hobbs. Can you tell us whether Republicans or Democrats vote at higher percentages statewide?
In general, or in early voting?
I think probably in general. It doesn't actually, the person who wrote that didn't actually specify. You can tell us whatever you know about that.
Well, traditionally we've been a more Republican state. There's a higher percentage of registered Republicans than Democrats, and Republicans have tended to have a little bit of higher turnout percentage. I think we're seeing that shift as we, are in battleground status this year. We're seeing increasing numbers of registered voters across the board, and obviously increased momentum and enthusiasm as we head into this election in November.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Ms. Mcreynolds, I've got a question here about to say that we've been, of course, advising older adults to remain physically distant from people to avoid serious infection from the coronavirus. Can you talk with us a little bit about how older adults might be able to vote safely while remaining physically distant?
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost, the permanent early voter list that you have in Arizona is obviously very convenient for voters that want to avoid crowded spaces or anything that might be going on with in-person voting, and then certainly drive-up drop-off as Recorder Rodriguez mentioned, and that is happening in various states, but it certainly seems to be something that also is very popular there. So I think those are really great ways, and then obviously drop boxes and things like that. So I think voting at home is clearly one of the best and safest options for voters, especially if they want to avoid, contact in person. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Recorder Rodriguez, if somebody wants to vote in person, and we know a number of people are going to want to vote in person, could you talk about safety measures that you're implementing to reduce the potential for the spread of infection?
Yes, all counties are following the PPE guidelines, where we have masks, hand sanitizers, rules in place of how often we have to wipe down the voting booths and things of that nature. What we're offering is that at our early voting site, we're doing the social distance. Usually I just have 4 staff members now at these early voting sites. Now I have 7. So they can monitor that. We have the same thing where the pins, where people vote a pins, you have a clean one, and then you have like at a doctor's office, you've seen it where everybody's using that method. They are required to wear masks. But if a voter does not want to wear a mask, they still have a right to vote at an early voting site. And the same thing will happen at polling locations on election day. We are setting up voting booths on the outside, because that is their right to still vote. And we take the information from them, go inside, print their ballot on demand, check their ID, and let them vote their ballot outside, while a staff member will sit there and wait till they finish, because we can't have them walk away with the ballot because we're in the building. So that's another method. And plus here in Pima County, as well as in the other counties, some of them are doing drop-off boxes. You're handing them to a staff member. So it's a drive up curbside. So we've had to implement all these extra things that we're not used to, find larger early voting sites so we can put extra voting booths in there while we keep the social distance policy in effect.
So apparently somebody's just asked us a question if any of you would like to express your opinion about same-day registration and voting, which we don't actually allow here in Arizona. So does anybody want to talk about that?
I can certainly talk about it. We do have that in Colorado. And so when I was the director of elections in Denver, we actually passed and I helped write the law on this. So it's tremendously beneficial to voters because when you do have a voter registration deadline, obviously a lot of voters are, and we particularly saw this in Colorado, but the most voters that benefited from same day are actually not new voters in the state, but voters that move within state, because people don't move to a different county around an election, and they don't plan a moving van to come the day after the election. And so when we implemented it, we actually saw by far the majority were just address moves or changes within counties or cross counties within the state. It was very rare that it would be somebody new that had just moved into the state. So the way that Colorado structured it was we do have same-day registration. We also have automatic registration. And we also automatically update addresses through motor vehicle as well as national change of address data. But then we also maintained a 22-day state residency requirement. So you still have to be a resident of the state for a period of time, but you can register to vote for the first time on election day and actually vote there. And it reduced our provisional ballots by 98%. So I believe it's a good reform that helps voters, and it certainly has worked very well in Colorado.
Secretary Hobbs, we just got another question from somebody who has written and I think touches a little bit on the residency requirement. I just moved to the state. Can I register right now? Are there any restrictions?
That actually might be a better question for Recorder Rodriguez.
Oh, okay.
Okay, could you repeat the question then again?
Sorry. Somebody just said that they have just moved to Arizona and they want to know if they can register immediately. It's essentially a question, I think, are there residency requirement to be able to vote?
Well, there's a 29 residency requirement, but because they're moving from one state to another one, we've had that issue because people said, I can't get a driver's license. MVD is, you have to go in and make an appointment if you're a new resident to the state. So what we've been telling people, go ahead and register if they have a passport or a birth certificate we will need, and they can not wait for their Arizona state driver's license, and then we'll process it because you have to prove citizenship. So we don't want those individuals to get in the box where they're a delayed factor, or they still have time in here, and by that time they'll make the requirement. So that's a simple method of doing that one. And it happens a lot of times, people are going from one here, and other states have longer voter registration cutoff periods. Some of them have shorter.
So you said 29 days?
They have to be here for 29 days of proof of residency, but sometimes you have to go back to the previous state to see where they were at and say, okay, can you get a ballot from there, depending on where it's at. So each one of these is a unique situation that we need to have a conversation with the voter.
Sure.
See what it is, because what we don't want them to do is get penalized because they're moving. Life doesn't stop for anyone.
So there's a couple of other sort of what I would call access questions, probably best directed at you. What about someone, how does someone vote if they're experiencing homelessness?
Homelessness here in, at least from Pima County, and it's the same probably across the other counties, they can use our address here at the courthouse. It's 240 North Stone. That's where they can be put into a proper precinct, and they can get their mail at a general delivery address. Some people are known. We have, homeless camps. They can mark it in the mapping section, And as long as we can identify which precinct that they live in or their camp is in, then we can put them in the correct precincts. So that's how we take care of homelessness. And there's certain agencies that have people that temporarily can live in places that we know where they're at here in Pima County, that they can use that for their address for voting purposes for a short period until they move on.
I remember years ago in the 80s, I was working at an agency that served a lot of homeless people, and we took to getting people registered to vote so they would have an ID card. The bad news was when it came time for election, we got, piles of publicity pamphlets from the Secretary of State's office in our mail. Our letter carrier hated us for a couple of weeks. But that's great. So another question related to access is about accommodations that are made for folks with differing physical abilities I assume on a voting the day of at a polling place.
Well, yes, it is. At a polling location or at an early voting location, we have accessible needs depending on what the situation for the individual voter is at, or if they're hearing impaired, sight impaired, or whatever. And sometimes we have people who are blind, and we spend the time reading the ballot to them if they would so like. Other people will request that a large print ballot, and I'm talking a large print ballot. We have to get special huge envelopes and we mail it to them. And we know which one those voters are here in Pima County because we order them all the time for them. They're regular voters. So there's different things that we could provide for the citizens. We have not had a request for a Braille one, but it is available, but we need those way in advance because those are special designed and implemented that so we can provide the ballot to the voter.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Norinder, these days it seems like our votes might not matter. We hear that from people when we talk about this stuff. So would you like to talk about how votes actually matter?
Well, as I mentioned previously, the votes matter not only because they're going to determine the outcome of the elections, but that they send messages to the people who do get elected in terms of what might be some of the preferences of the voters. And there are the idea that voting is one of the main ways that we have of communicating with public officials. Of course, we can also send them text messages and use their websites to send them messages about specific issues, but still the main way that most people communicate their preferences is through voting for the candidates.
Great. Secretary Hobbs, I'm one of those people who has, 2 iPads and an iPhone open on election night at the Pima County elections website and your website as well, trying to look at all the races. Certainly, one of the things that we hear is a drawback about mail-in voting is the amount of time that it can take to get election results for tight races. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, what I can say, most importantly, that people need to remember is that the election doesn't end when the polls close on election night at 7 p.m. And we have county election directors across the state who are focused on getting it right, making sure that every valid ballot that was cast is able to be counted. And so, and in Arizona, we're lucky because we can start processing and counting early ballots 14 days before the election. Or actually, processing can begin immediately in terms of verifying the signature and getting them ready for tabulation. Tabulation starts 14 days before the election. So if voters are voting early and getting their ballot back early, then they're going to be tabulated. And those are really the first results that we see posted on election night. And then it's those ballots that get dropped off on election day that are not in that election tabulation. But I don't want to deter anybody from voting and casting their ballot, whether they get it in early or they get it in on election day. And they should not worry about their ballot slowing down election results. We are not going to have a final result in the presidential race on election night, and that is normal. That is not delayed. That is normal. And I think it's a little bit irresponsible for the media to demand these quick results, because we need to get it right, and we need to make sure that voters who are eligible to vote and cast a valid ballot have those ballots counted.
Great, thank you. So let's see. We try to educate people about fraud and about not giving out their personal information here at PCOA. So, but it would be good for folks to know what type of information they can expect to need to give when they register to vote. Recorder Rodriguez, that's probably a good one for you.
Well, there's certain requirements that we do need to complete a voter registration form. Not everything needs to be on the form that we're asking for. On the new statewide forms, which are the full 8.5 by 11, we need your full name, your address, your date of birth, Arizona State driver's license. You can have it for proof of citizenship, your signature and date it. And those are about the main requirements that we have to have in order to process a voter registration. The other questions they have it is your parents, your mother's maiden name or your father's name. This is so for similar names so we can identify individuals. The last 4 digits of your social security number, that's optional, as well as your phone number. If you're using Service Arizona, we will then capture your email address, because that's how we're getting it. So those are predominantly the main reasons that we have. If you put a P.O. box in a residence address, we'll kick that out, because you don't live in a P.O. box. We need to assign you to the correct precinct so that we can issue the correct ballot to the voter based on that residential address.
So I think when I was 17, the first public office I held was I was a deputy registrar in Maricopa County. I actually was trained that way because I was going to turn 18 before the recall election. Well, before the general election, and it was a big deal. You had to go to the county's auditorium and get trained and get sworn in, and I was so proud to be a deputy registrar, and I've been involved in registering people to vote. That was probably 1970.
Well, so, Mark, so was I. So we're dating ourselves. But I was a deputy registrar when you had to keep your logbook and everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those were the days. Yep.
Yep. So somebody wants to know just a little easy stuff about how they change their party or sign up for the permanent early voting list.
Well, that can be handled very.
Oh, you again.
That can be handled very easily. They can go through Service Arizona, make sure your address is up to date, and sign up for the permanent early voting list, or change your party political affiliation. Right now, for the general elections, your political party affiliation is not going to matter, because everyone's going to get the same ballot. On my website, as well as I think every other website, you can download a paper form to print out to be placed on the permanent early voting list. I believe Maricopa County has a new process in place that you don't need to fill out a form, but in all the other counties, we need a paper form. Or you can go online and do a one-time request for a ballot right now for this election. Just answer the correct information directly on my website. The Secretary of State's office also has it for the other 13 counties. She provides that service, and Maricopa County has their own too. The 2 larger counties we have our own IT staff. We're more robust. We can do things differently and as we want to design it than the 13 counties, which use the statewide system through the Secretary of State's office.
Okay. Ms. Mcreynolds, we were just talking about the permanent early voting list in Arizona, which we've had for a long, long time. Well, not that long, but it seems like a long time. So we're curious what you know about how Arizona system is different than other state system. How does it compare?
Well, I can tell you it's far superior to close to 40 states right now. So, and the reason I say that honestly is that in Colorado was a permanent vote at home state, meaning you just had to sign up the one time, and then that request would carry into the future. And the benefit really of that is for election officials and for voters alike. So, in a lot of these states, and I've been doing a lot of work with Georgia as an example, Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. In the state of Georgia, you have to actually sign up to request a ballot each election. So they spent $7 million sending out applications to all of their electors for their June primary. And those requests were no good after that election. So then people had to request again for the special election that they had in September. And then now we had to make another request for November. And what that means is election officials are constantly having to process all of this paperwork. And so we keep seeing significant backlogs in states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia and kind of all over the country, because the same voters have to keep making the same request over and over. So there's a lot of inefficiency in a lot of state systems because they haven't been proactive like Arizona was to put good practices like that in place that kind of saved voters time, but it also saved election officials time at having to make those requests and process them all the time. So that's a big one. And then certainly Arizona and the counties in Arizona have more sophisticated counting equipment and processing equipment. A lot of states that had 5% vote by mail just don't have the central count scanning abilities that they now need with the 10 times the increase than what they've had before. So Philadelphia, for instance, is a great example. They've spent close to $10 million in outfitting their office with the right equipment that they need for the enhanced vote by mail system. So, states have just lagged, frankly, compared to Western states. Western states have led on this issue for a long period of time. And really that's been in response to what voters have asked for. So Arizona by far is, much further along. And I think Arizona will also not see a lot of the long lines on election day that a lot of states will see, because so many Arizonan voters have opted in to vote by mail.
And Amber, you're totally right. We were inundated with these requests repeatedly every election and hearing from our constituents. And back in 2007, that's why we did the legislation, did all the checks and balance and said, hey, you guys are getting elected by the early voting numbers, whether you like the method or not. Yeah. And because it was wearing us out, because besides processing the request, automation wasn't set ready to do the ballots by machine. We were doing it manually. So, we were just killing ourselves around the clock on doing this one. So that's what I said. It's beneficial for Arizona, and it has been for years. And I feel the pain for these other states, because it's going to be a shock to them and to their staff.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Norinder, we have a question about the rise in the independently registered independent voters. Do you have an opinion or a thought or research about why that is?
I actually have research on that.
All right.
And the reason is that Arizona switched from a closed primary system in the 1990s to a semi-closed primary system. I think it was in 1998 was when the ballot proposition passed. And so the incentives when a state has a closed primary where only registered Democrats and registered Republicans can vote in those primaries, then people register as Democrats or Republicans, not to disenfranchise themselves. The incentives under a semi-closed primary, which is what we have for every office except for the president, is for people to register as an independent. And so that allows them the choice of which primary they want to use. And then just looking at the past registration figures that are on this Arizona State Secretary's website, you can see that in the 1990s, the number of people who are registered as independents in Arizona was very low. And now in 2020, the number of Arizonans who are registered as independents is quite high.
Well, there you go. Okay. Secretary Hobbs, I think we want to, we'd like to come back around and give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the safety of mail voting. Again, we sort of talked around it, but maybe you could share some, because that's probably the number one question I think that I'm hearing people ask. And so.
Yeah, great. Glad for the opportunity to do that. Arizonans, as you've heard, have been voting by mail for decades with no excuse. And it's become the preferred method of voting for most Arizonans. 75% of our voters across the state are on the permanent early voter list. In the 2018 election, 78% of voters voted that way. And in the primary that we just held in August, it was 88%. So I think that it's clear that Arizonans trust this process. And we know, because we've had years to work with it and build the infrastructure, as Recorder Rodriguez was discussing, then we're in really good shape as we head into this election where we anticipate, again, increased early voting. So it's important, I think, for people to know that nobody is sent an unsolicited ballot. You have to be a registered voter who's requested an early ballot in order to receive one in the mail. So I know there's a lot of misinformation out there nationally about this, and that is absolutely not something that happens here in Arizona. Those ballots are tracked when the county recorder sends it to you, and then when you return it, you can actually you can go online to find out if it's been received. You can call the county recorder's office and determine that that ballot has been received, it's ready for processing, or if there are any issues. Ballots are sent in tamper-evident envelopes. Your identity as a voter is verified with your signature on the affidavit, and that is verified through a rigorous process by trained staff. And then once the ballots are processed through that signature verification, they are treated just like in-person ballots in terms of how they're handled and stored and secured. And I also want to point out that our tabulation process across the state, every tabulation room in every county has cameras, and anyone can go to the county website, the county election website, and watch that process as it happens. So that 14 days before the election, when counties start tabulating, that's open to the public and anyone can watch it. So it's a very transparent process. And I think that's something that Arizonans can be really proud of in terms of ensuring the integrity of the process. I also know that a lot of people have concerns about their ballot by mail just because of things that have been happening with the Postal Service. And so we've been in conversations with postal officials in the state, and as well as at a national level with Postmaster General DeJoy. And we've been assured that that they continue to treat ballots as a top priority in terms of mail assessing, and that the capacity is there to handle expected increases in vote by mail for this election. So we are taking that at face value, and obviously recommending voters return their ballots as early as possible. So don't wait until the recommended return date of October 27th. Vote it as soon as you get it and send it back. But we also have other options for you to return your ballot. So you can return it at an early voting location. You can return it at a secure ballot drop box. You can take it to your county elections office or the county recorder's office. And drop it off on election day. So there's a lot of options to do that. They're all secure, and all of those, you can go to the Pima County Recorder's website to find out all of those locations. You can also get them through arizona.vote if you're not in Pima County. So it is an extremely secure process. Arizonans have demonstrated their confidence in it. We saw increased vote by mail this primary, and we know that we will in November as well.
Great, thank you so much. I had another question for you that I haven't, I'm embarrassed to say I've not been really tracking on voting for folks living in skilled nursing care facilities, long-term care facilities, things like that. I know there was, well, I think I read there may be a little bit of a dispute going on, but just in general, how would people normally in those facilities, because PCOA is the ombudsman for older adults in Pima County, and so we're concerned about the rights of older adults to living there. There's about 400 of these facilities, almost 9,000 beds in Pima County. So how do those folks vote who aren't able to get out?
Well, and I think Recorder Rodriguez, jump in here if you want to, but if folks are able to complete their ballot, then we encourage them to request a ballot by mail so that they can vote that way. And they can either return it in the mail, or they can have a caregiver is able to return that ballot on their behalf. If somebody requires assistance with completing a ballot, whether they're at their own home or in a facility, a hospital, nursing home, long-term care facility, assisted living facility, then they can request a special election board from their county. And that is something that's been authorized in statute for a long time. And that special election board consists of two individuals of two different parties who will help the person fill out the ballot, basically completing it at that voter's direction. And then instead of the voter signing the affidavit on the envelope, then the special election board signs that portion for assistance. And so obviously right now we're in a situation where there is limited or restricted visitation to some of these facilities. And the disagreement that you mentioned is really about how we conduct those how counties can conduct those special election boards if they're not able to get into a facility to provide that assistance. And in our office recently guidance, it is not binding, it is not a direction, it is guidance in terms of how that might be facilitated.
Mark, I'll jump in here. Pima County, we've been doing this for years. It's nothing new. It's just that we're living longer and people have different needs. It depends on I've had young people that have gotten automobile accident and they're paraplegic, and we've had to go in there and assist them. There are sometimes we go into the homes because they're living in their homes as independent as they can, but they have somebody in there to help them 24/7. They don't want the caretaker to know how they vote. So we go into the assisted livings. We used to be called into the IC units at the hospitals all the time because, years back when people or the traditionalists like to go to their polling location. Excuse me. I had one time a nurse called me from a hospital, says this man needs to be admitted. It was a Sunday. He says, but he has to go vote on Tuesday. She goes, would you send a team over because he needs to be admitted? He had a heart attack. And we did send a team over. Excuse me. So this is not something new. We've been doing it for many years. Maricopa County came up with a great idea, doing like what we're doing right now to help these citizens. So we just want to be able to do that.
Well, certainly there is a lot of conversation going on right now. I'm on the governor's long-term care task force, and we've been talking about who gets in and under what circumstances. So it is definitely a major issue. So I think somebody wanted to know about collecting ballots from loved ones, because do we have some restriction on ballot harvesting as the one term, right? Or am I out of date?
No. I don't like calling it ballot harvesting because that sounds like you're doing something nefarious, like harvesting organs. But yes, we do have a felony ban on collecting and turning in other people's ballots. So just to be clear, someone who is a caregiver, a family member or household member is able to turn in a ballot on your behalf. But we no longer have like organizations who are going and doing that. It could result in a felony charge, and we don't want anyone to be charged of a crime for helping people to vote.
Okay, well, I think I got one. This may be our last question. So somebody wants to know, as this is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, do women in Arizona vote at a higher rate than men? Does anybody know the answer to that?
I believe the answer is yes.
I don't know in Arizona, but nationwide, women vote at a higher rate than men, and that's been true since the 1980s.
Great. Recorder Rodriguez, I think we kind of want to wrap up here with actionable and tangible information. So somebody can find their polling place by calling your office.
They can find that by calling my office at 724-4330. It's also listed on the recorder's main website at polling location. And people have to realize that a lot of their polling locations have changed because of COVID. Churches were not even offering church services, schools, and what have you. So they need to look on the website for their new polling location for this election. They are subject to availability by the facilities, and we had to make sure that all of the facilities were large enough rooms to do the social distancing that way. So they can find out that information. They can also find out the information if they're going to be getting a permanent early voting list. We've had so many calls and complaints about they're getting texts. Now Turbo Vote is doing something, I don't control the third-party groups. Some of them are doing great collaboration with our office, and there's other ones that are not. They're using intimidation tactics I do not approve of saying that people have to re-register because it's the law, and saying that they work. They actually came to me when I picked up my P.O. box and said they're working with the recorder's office. It was a pleasant exchange. They had no idea. One of the things I also want to stress out there is that in some states, but it's not Arizona, some states you're required to put a postage stamp on your ballot being mailed back. That is not true in Arizona. We pay for the postage. Do not put a postage stamp on it, because there are barcodes that are on the return mailing envelope that separates it through the automation process at the post office. And we don't want those ballots to be then handed like, they have to hand sort them. The automation process works wonderful out here. And, I have to give compliments to the post office. I've met with them. I know Maricopa County has met with the post office up there. All the ballots in Pima County that are mailed are delivered here to Cherryville. I usually meet them. It'll probably take 3 semi-trucks. For my first loadout is like 460,000. And Maricopa County, I lost track. They reached 2.5 million of voters now here in Maricopa County. So the post office has done a great service here in this state, because we've been collaborating with them through years. My mailing envelopes are green going out. The return envelope is yellow. So we've had a good working relationship. I think in Maricopa County, they've had the same thing. And then some of the smaller counties, they're also working with their post offices. They're smaller, but nevertheless, that's how they route this here. So, everybody tends to beat up on the post office, but they're doing a good job. They're stepping up. Unfortunately, some politics got in at the national level, so we hope that rest assures. But if citizens don't want to entrust or put the return ballot in the mail, there's so many options to drop it off across the state, either a drop box, early voting site, or curbside. So there's plenty of opportunities to that one. The other thing, there is a new way where voters, and I've been offering here in Pima County for years, people can track their ballot. In Pima County, you go to the main website and track ballot status. We will tell you when we received it, if we signature checked it, if we accepted it, or you need to call our office and because we have an issue with your signature on file. Maricopa County does the same thing, and the Secretary of State's office provides that service for the other 13 counties. So everybody can check their ballots once they've either dropped it off, put it in the mail. There's a method for them to find out where their ballot is in the process.
Well, thank you so much. So we've got just like 2 or 3 minutes. So does anybody else have a last minute comment they want to make right now?
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
So being someone that works across the country and in various states and all of this, I'm getting a very good view, especially my team working with so many counties that we are. And Arizona truly has incredible election officials. They're the guardians of democracy. And, you know, I think exercising patience and supporting them and thanking them for all the work that they're doing every day in the election process goes a long way, certainly to support their efforts. And you have an incredible, and there's 2 right on the call today that are just amazing. So I think it'd be great to see more appreciation from the public for how much work goes into elections, for sure.
That sounds like a t-shirt. Guardian of democracy. Anything else? Well, thank you all so much for being here. I know people that have been watching this and people that will watch it, because we'll put it up on our website, are going to be so benefited from the information and the conversation, and we really appreciate you being here. So we want to thank you. It is obviously we're virtual, but of course, if you've got questions about voting or how to access a ballot for November's election here in Pima County, you can call the Pima County Recorder's Office. Again, the number is 520-724-4330. And if you live outside of Pima County, visit the Secretary of State's voter website, votearizona.vote. And remember, no matter how you decide to vote on November 3rd, and you need to register by October 5th if you're going to vote on November 3rd, please make sure your vote is heard, your vote is counted. Thank you very much, and we appreciate it.
Mark, may I personally thank you for you and your Pima Council on Aging with working with my office and getting information out to all your membership and with very important voting information. So I personally thank you, and thank you for putting this on for your listening audience.
Well, thank you so much. And again, thanks so much. And we know you are all going to be busy, even if you're a university professor, you're still going to be busy looking at stuff and researching. And we need more guardians of democracy. So thank you so much. We appreciate it.